And we have a special guest with us today, whose name I am bound to mispronounce once or twice during the show because I do that. That's what I do for a living. So I mispronounce names. Right, Hassan?
You've never done that.
Yeah. But welcome into the show. This gentleman, his name is Shahid Buttar, and he is a progressive candidate from California 12, running against Nancy Pelosi again. He's also a community activist and a congressional attorney, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Constitutional.
What did I say?
Congressional.
I said congressional attorney, of which there's no such thing.
What is that?
A congressional attorney is an attorney who works for Donald Trump and tries to get him off impeachment. That's what I just created. That it's a new thing. So
none of them yet to advise congressional committees. So it's not crazy, you know. Like you're in the ballpark. It's all good.
Perfect. So Shahid, do us a favor if you would. Tell us a little bit of the elevator speech on yourself, what you do, what you're down with, and why on earth you came here to this horrible place.
Well, I came here because you invited me, and I appreciate the invitation.
You just go anywhere people invite you, you know.
More or less, that's kind of what running for office is about. But I'm a constitutional lawyer. I'm a DJ, rapper, music producer, grassroots organizer. I was the first Democrat to face Nancy Pelosi on a general election ballot, and we just won 80,000 votes from San Franciscans to replace her as our city's voice in Congress. I haven't yet announced my plans for 2022, but I'm exploring the possibility of running again to represent my city and expand the squad and help us secure a policy vision that supports the future. One that includes the Green New Deal, one that includes universal health care, federal right to housing, one that centers our communities and our people instead of capital and corporations.
Man, there's people that will call you one of them damn reptilian lizard people eating babies, talking all that mess about inclusion and medicine for everybody.
Illuminati confirmed.
How many babies?
Ball are you from?
How much baby's blood have you drank today? That's what we want to know.
That's not nice.
Not us. We're just saying that's
has to be, man. It has to be true. Like everything you hear on QAnon is completely.
We heard that. We heard it on OANN.
Yeah, but we heard it. Should say this, and that election disinformation was a real thing in our race in 2020. It is funny to joke about, but having been targeted by racist smears by the political establishment,
I'm sure.
Pelosi, you know, it's
by Pelosi. No, not Pelosi. All right. So first of all, I definitely want to hear about that, but I need to pass here the reins to.
No, we're fine.
Wrong direction. This guy down here. So Mikey.
No, we're good.
You're good. No, you got it. You got it. Nope, you got it.
Let's not waste time. Let's not waste time dithering about who's going to say what. Mikey, just go.
Cool. You guys were gonna Dutch. You were about to bring up Nancy Pelosi and
how much he hates her.
I see how I passed it to him, then he just alley-ooped it right back, and I missed the slam dunk, of course. So Nancy Pelosi, I can't stand her. I was very much wishing that she would not be continuing her term as speaker. However, corporates always win. So I do want to hear about that. But before you tell me about the situation that you just spoke about with Nancy Pelosi, I would like to know your thoughts on her thoughts that we pray for a strong GOP in America because a strong GOP makes this country great. So your thoughts on that, Shahid?
It's predictably lame and reflects the attitude of corporate Democrats who perceive the GOP not necessarily as a threat to our communities, not necessarily as a threat to the future. It's each of those things, but rather as foils. You know, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump, for instance, they played a grand theater of opposing each other, and they paved each other's road. They demonized each other and used each other to raise money from their respective bases. And that's, I think, why Pelosi wants a strong GOP. If we wanted to indulge her and give her the benefit of every doubt, you might say that, oh, well, there was an era in American politics before the GOP was run by Donald Trump when things might have seemed more sane. It's totally untrue, just to be clear, because if we rewind the clock, other Republican presidents, what did George W. Bush do? Torture some folks, invade countries at the drop of a hat. What did Ronald Reagan do? Train Al-Qaeda, mine the harbor of Nicaragua, run drugs into the US, and spark a mass incarceration crisis? Republican presidents have, for the last several decades, preyed on the public. The only hole in the bucket here is that corporate Democrats do it too, which is precisely why I think Nancy Pelosi wants a strong GOP, because it gives her cover. As long as there is a strong GOP, corporate Democrats can get away with more or less anything they want, as long as they don't show up to debate challengers and voters don't realize the alternatives that we have. And that's one reason why I'm so grateful for the chance to offer San Francisco a counterpoint, because I see the co-opted rule, leadership, in fact, of a voice of one of America's most progressive cities. And what Nancy Pelosi centers in her policy vision is not San Francisco, not our city's values, not our communities. What she centers is Wall Street and the Pentagon. And the American people deserve better than that.
So would you think it was fair to say that I agree with everything you just said, by the way, but it also kind of lends credence to this like old guard kind of just having this perseveranceable nature.
Wow.
They really want to protect. The old guard is just protecting itself. They're trying to just preserve what they always know to do in politics, where they just pretend to hate each other so that they can get money for their campaigns, and then meanwhile they're off doing tea time at 7 a.m. at the Greens.
So you're saying this is like Bridgerton, but the reverse?
Yeah. What's Bridgerton?
Oh, I thought everybody watched Bridgerton like me.
No, you're the only one. I have no idea.
They pretend to love each other.
Shahid, what's Bridgerton?
They really
Yeah,
don't
I
like
wasn't sure either. Thank you, Mike, for giving me.
Shahid has been out running for office. He is not watching Bridgerton. Lames like us are watching Bridgerton.
No, lames like you.
Lames like me. And I'm an old nerd and lame from way back. So, I got my card and everything. I renew every year. So that's just who I am.
I was out buying hats for 37 cents. I didn't have time to watch.
Right. I ordered this hat from China.
I like the hat, by the way.
Shahid, would you also, because one of the things that I've always looked at the Democratic Party about as a former Republican is like, especially when it comes to guys like Clinton specifically, and I think what Hillary would have done as well. I think it's very fair to include in your statement the Clintons. I think it's fair to include Pelosi in that statement. I also think it's fair to include LBJ, probably more so than most, maybe not Jimmy Carter. But when it comes to these corporate Democrats, like, what are your thoughts when it comes to their control over the DNC? Because it seems to me like whenever a progressive candidate runs, and I don't agree with everything on the progressive agenda, but what I do dislike is that when someone does run, and I have 4 or 5 pillars with which I do agree with the progressive agenda on, and I strongly think are great, like Medicare for all, the fucking DNC decides they're not going to support that candidate, like they did with Cory Bush, and they run a freaking corporate Democrat who loves oil and big pharma against them. What is with that?
I mean, to be fair, I think you're in some respects being entirely too charitable to the DNC, because they frankly do worse than that. The DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, announced that any consultants, any staff, anyone who works with, supports, consults with, is hired by a campaign like mine challenging an entrenched incumbent, that those people will basically be forever blacklisted and denied opportunities within the party. That might sound like a problem for people like me. It's a bigger problem for people who want to work in the establishment, but have ideas. And in fact, it's exactly that incentive that prompted some very unethical behavior by former campaign staff who once worked for me. And I would say, when I see corporate Democrats towing the line of Republicans from issue after issue, whether that's prioritizing tax breaks for the wealthy in the first round of COVID relief before working class Americans got their checks, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump teamed up to give 43,000 millionaires tax breaks averaging over $1.5 million each. And that took Democrats when Trump built his concentration camps at our nation's border, where DHS is now practicing Nazi eugenics techniques. He didn't do that alone. Anything that Donald Trump did that involved the federal bureaucracy, the federal apparatus, it took Nancy Pelosi to write the check. She's the Speaker of the House. Nothing can happen without her participation. And whether it's wars for profit, whether it's concentration camps, whether it's covering up CIA torture, or kicking the American people down the stairs while serving the needs of Wall Street, that is an agenda, to your point, that unites not just the GOP, but corporate Democrats too. And it's one reason why it's so important for a populist challenge on the left to displace corporate centrism and give the American people an opportunity to delegitimate the center, but not from the right. In other words, the center is delegitimating itself with every passing day. Every day that the pandemic goes on and neither major party in Washington is saying we need to join the rest of the world and recognize that healthcare is a right, every day that passes, I think more and more Americans see through the sham. And unfortunately, we are presented the illusion of conflict among adversarial parties that, to your point, are absolutely marching in lockstep on issues from wars for profit, fossil fuel extraction, the military industrial complex, not just internationally, but how it manifests domestically in the form of a mass incarceration plague. And all of these issues are effectively objects of background consensus across the major parties. And that's not good enough by a long shot.
Fair enough.
I like you, Shahid.
What was
I like you too. Thank you. That's good.
Well, not so fast. You don't like him yet. You don't know him that well.
You don't know what I think.
Yeah.
Get the hell out of my face. Look at
I'm talking to
I'm
talking to him. I'm talking to Shahid.
Damn, dude.
I'm talking to Shahid, not Mikey. Shahid, don't make character judgments yet, Shahid, about any of us. What was it specifically that happened to you before we get into the history part with Pelosi, with the campaign? Because I do want to hear about that, and I doubt I'll be shocked.
I appreciate that. And just to be clear, it didn't come from Pelosi. These were smears made by campaign careerists who wanted careers in the establishment. And
I had one quick question.
Yeah.
What you said, the DCCC, what is that exactly? That's the first I've heard of that.
It's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. So it's the organization that supports Democratic incumbents when they seek re-election. And that blacklist policy I described was its attempt to suppress challengers like Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, me, other members of the squad. Everybody who's
as a St. Louis native. My girl Cori Bush tore it down. That's my girl.
Are you from St. Louis too? I grew up in the county. So Cori Bush, right on. Midwest.
Yeah.
So, Cori represents the district where I graduated from high school. And I got to be honest with you.
Where'd you go to high school?
Ladue, Horton Watkins High School.
No, you went to Ladue? I didn't go to high school down there. I went to South County for middle school, and then I moved back up here to Chicago now.
Okay, right on. I went to Chicago for college and spent 10 years there.
I told you we was friends.
No doubt. But just to this point about St. Louis, I am somewhat embarrassed as a San Franciscan that St. Louis, Missouri has a representative in Congress who favors the Green New Deal, limits on police, and Medicare for all. But San Francisco somehow does not. And that's not a stain on, on anybody's conscience, I think, but the cities. It is really embarrassing that one of our world's most progressive cities is represented in Washington by so conservative a voice. And Cori Bush's entry to Congress, it frankly shamed all of California. There is not a single member of the squad from California.
And that goes into the Senate too. Look at Feinstein. I mean, I don't think Xavier Becerra is any different than, he's probably to the right of Kamala Harris on a couple of issues, which is saying something, because she wasn't, the most left, what you would call a progressive candidate. I think she pretended to be sometimes, but look at the right wingers we have here. In my district in Bakersfield in 2023, we have McCarthy, who is one of the moderates, they say.
Yeah.
But then we have Devin Nunes.
Right.
So it's like somehow the extremists on the conservative side make it in, but the You know, the more progressive folks on the left are completely blackballed out in the state. Look, Gavin Newsom is right in that.
Who is Nancy
conversation as well.
Pelosi's nephew, incidentally, by marriage. Like, there's an interesting point to be made there about the establishments, not just corporate Democrats, but even
The dogs don't like Pelosi either, apparently, because the dogs are howling.
I think that's my housemate's beagle.
But you were saying?
I'm sorry.
Oh, you were going to talk about what happened with the what were the specifics of what they did?
Right. So a bunch of people seeking careers in the establishment made up false sexual misconduct allegations, and they spread it across political organizations in San Francisco. They accused me of a pattern of inappropriate behavior with volunteers. And just to be clear, there's not even a single incident. And it took my volunteers, who my former staff was lying about, to come forward. They shared text messages proving that it was all a fake plot. And the very same newspapers that printed every accusation among a dozen that these people articulated, not a single one of them was willing to actually cover the facts. And it did take The Intercept eventually, after 2 months, actually reported the story and made clear that there was nothing here.
They were there.
But by the time they did that,
with the same energy, that's what I was just going to say. Do they report their apology and retraction with the same energy as they reported the accusations and allegations?
No, it's on page 8.
Not nearly. And not only that, but they, you know, when you throw a bunch of stories out in July, a few months before an election, accusing a man of color falsely of sexual misconduct for political purposes,
right,
and then the story doesn't get corrected until late September for a November election. And I want to make this clear: the victims of election disinformation are not the targets. Like, yes, I was smeared,
right,
and yes, it was libelous, and I was defamed, and a bunch of people made up a bunch of things about me. But the harm is to the voters and democracy. And all of the people who smeared me have been rewarded by San Francisco's political establishment. Several of them were just appointed to be delegates to the state assembly by the chair of our local Democratic Party committee. And the idea that the perpetrators, the architects of racist smear campaigns, are rewarded by a city's political establishment, that should alarm people even in cities that do not consider themselves progressive. But in a city like San Francisco, honestly, it's outrageous. And, you know, it's entirely what we should expect when the DCCC announces that anybody who works with an insurgent campaign will never have a career. And then to watch people embrace accusations that are predictably false. You know, to me, it was, to say the least, disappointing. And I'll just say that, you know, I remain committed to the issues even more so than ever. And the last thing that will ever push me out of politics is a racist smear campaign by a bunch of careerists. I fought the Bush administration. I fought the Obama administration from the left. I fought Trump's corruption. I fought Nancy Pelosi's service to all of those administrations. There's no way a group of self-promoting careerists are going to push me out of politics.
Yeah, he ain't going nowhere. So so come with your facts next time. Guess who's on the campaign next time? It's me and High and Dutch. We showing up too.
Shahid, boy, out there for life.
That is so infuriating to me, and I have to laugh and giggle and make jokes about it, because this is why good people don't run for office, right? This is why people that we actually want to be in positions of power and to make certain decisions are not doing it, because it's like, oh, no, man, I got too many skeletons in my closet. And then I know that I've known them for a million years. I know Haas well enough. Whatever skeletons he thinks he has, the one that they're going to make up about him are 10 times worse.
Right. Well, and you just nailed it. You know, I don't have skeletons in my closet. It's one reason why I ran, because I have the receipts. For 20 years. I've done unpopular things that prove to be right in retrospect. Right. And I'm tired of saying I told you so. And, you know, to your point, if you don't have skeletons and you challenge power effectively, some people will hang a bunch of paper mache ones in your closet and then run those by the press. And, you know, I've lamented the erosion of the media establishment in the United States and its, you know, co-opted lack of independence, its diminishing capacity. I've frankly been amazed at not just the failures of the press, but the weaponization of the press in the service of the establishment. And, I'm used to that in the sense of Washington reporters who don't fact check their sources and just, print anonymous quotes by government officials as stenography. I didn't expect that from San Francisco journalists who describe themselves as progressive. And, they'll take editorial positions that favor progressive interests, but then they'll embody white supremacy in their so-called journalism. And, that infected outlets from the San Francisco Chronicle to The Intercept, Mission Local. Outlets that at one point covered our race fairly, unfortunately, were willing to serve the establishment instead of their own professional ethics. And it was ultimately democracy and the voters of San Francisco who were harmed as a result.
I have to smile and now I'm mad because I can't just scream into the mic and fix it. It'll be bad for the audio. Dutch will yell at me. He'll tell me to turn my gain down. It'll be this whole thing. But thank you for
I'm not popping, am I today?
No, I think you got you dialed in, big man. You dialed in. Please put your tongue in your mouth when you're looking at me though, because you're doing the whole easy LL Spice Adams. Stop.
Looks like he's dribbling down the lane.
I just sprayed some jupe.
Wearing some Guess jeans.
Brother, covered jeans, slacks on.
I guess like the jeans.
All right. Well, damn, man, that pisses me off, and that.
Just to be clear, though, before you get too pissed off, in spite of that,
yes,
and in spite of a corporate media whiteout, because the corporate television stations in San Francisco never covered us once, and in spite of being outspent 15-1, we still scored more votes than anyone ever to challenge Nancy Pelosi. And as the first Democrat on the ballot against her, another thing that harmed the city and democracy was her refusal to debate anyone since 1987. And there's not a single reporter anywhere at any point that has ever asked her how she justifies that. And, in spite of those obstacles, to still win 80,000 votes, I'm stoked.
Huge. So she's refused to debate since 87?
The last time she debated anyone, Ronald Reagan was the president.
Holy wow.
And she's the leader of the so-called Democratic Party, which I find particularly amusing in terms of the just layers of hypocrisy.
The irony. And I kind of, because of politicians like Nancy Pelosi, I refuse to identify as Democrat. I'll just say, what are you? It's progressive, and I'm a secular humanist. That's all you need to know.
Right on.
Yeah.
I care about people in general. And people like you give me hope that the Democratic Party of the 80s and 90s is on its way out. Well, and I can get back on the squad. I'm saying, get back on the team now, because I have a couple of younger people that I talk to and mentor and shit like that. And they think politics is stupid because everybody's on the same team.
Right.
Well, the people in power now seem to be mostly all on the same team.
Yeah.
But there are people that are not on that team and are ready to replace the people who are supposed to be standing for X, Y, and Z, who are not standing for X, Y, and Z, and are just literally being on the same team with people who don't have everyone's best interest at heart.
Just to make a couple real quick points here. One, I want to go back maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago. We made this point that the center is delegitimating itself. The reaction of those young people who you're mentoring is a predictable reflection of precisely that. They have witnessed the reality of cooperation among parties who rely on a rhetoric of opposition. Right. And young people see through spin, and that's a very revealing and important recognition, I should say. Beyond that, when you talked about the flex and challenge within the party for its soul, 2 points to make here. One, corporate Democrats and their seizure of the party are relatively recent. Now, that happened under Clinton in the 90s. We're only 30 years into that kind of particular co-optation. Now, to Dutch's point, previous Democratic presidents had their problems too, right? I mean, LBJ in Vietnam, I could go on, but the point I would raise here is the particular fealty to Wall Street, the willingness to serve the finance industry and to put the military industrial complex, not just in the context of foreign wars, but resource allocation, all the various dimensions of putting them before we, the people of the United States. It was really Bill Clinton who pioneered that. And corporate Democrats call that a success.
Right.
Because, and this is the thing I'd want to say here. It's really easy to score tactical victories when you give up all your strategic goals, which is exactly what corporate Democrats do. They brag about victories like getting Biden in the White House when the policy agenda has no relationship to the party's rhetoric, right? I mean, he's a perfect example of a right-wing corporate Democrat promoted by the center. And I think those young people that you're mentoring who recognize that there is, unfortunately, another layer going on that doesn't get reported, the extent to which these people in Washington are ultimately playing on the same team against the rest of us, against we, the people of the United States. That's an incredibly astute observation. And I'm glad to see young people gripping that. But last thing to say here is the squad. When you were talking about people challenging the center, there's the squad in Congress. What a lot of people overlook is local politics. When you drill down to your city council and your school board, almost anywhere in America, there is someone who is about it and has done the work and is doing it not to build a career, but to represent their community. And even if Bernie Sanders is the only presidential candidate you've ever seen actually go to the mat for the American people, there are people in every community across the United States seeking elected office at very empowered local small jurisdictional units. The smaller the unit, the more empowered the office. And to your young people who are disillusioned, and one thing you might remind them is, even if they recognize the vacuousness of national politics, there's always the opportunity to seize the reins at the local level.
Boy, the right wingers aren't going to like you because you speak so eloquently. You're like Obama Part 2. He's so well spoken. But it's
you hear the timbre in his voice.
Yeah. Like that with that beard.
Say again.
You wouldn't think he'd speak that well with that beard.
No, but like what you were saying is interesting because I had a congressional candidate on back in 2018 who ran against Lucille. Is it Roy Ball? Allard in LA, I think 41 or 40 or something like that is her district. And when he was on, now he was a Green Party candidate, but he made the general election. And one of the things that I found interesting is when I posted our interview, and he said a lot of stuff that I didn't agree with, but I got lambasted, and so did he, for promoting a candidate because Lucille Allard, Lucille Royale Albard. I think I'm saying her name wrong. Like I said, that's my thing. But
Roy Ball Allard, I think.
Roy Boy Allard. It's her father was like a civil rights champion for Latinos in the 1950s and 1960s. Great. But because of the fact that her father was a civil rights champion, therefore she must be perpetually in Congress. How dare you run against her? How dare we promote it?
Right.
We got super crazy messages on that back in probably June of 2018 when we ran that interview. So it was that was really where it first stuck with me, like this backlash against progressivism, and from someone who's not really a progressive, but I do share a lot of those tenets. It's disturbing because you talked about the disintegration of the center. I think also the center is mischaracterized because a lot of times, like, I think of myself as being more in the center, but not because I'm soft on an issue. Like, I believe in 2A. I believe in, I prefer lower taxes in an ideal world, but I know taxes make societies work at the same time. You can't have a structured society without tax. Look at the Articles of Confederation for proof if you like. But also when it comes to Medicare for all and civil rights, I'm further left than almost anybody you'll meet. And that's not being in the middle. That's just saying, hey, this is what I believe in and going all for that. But people will say, oh, well, because you must just be soft on the issues like Joe Biden, but it's unfortunate. But at the same time, that's the polarity of this country, is like both sides there's an intolerance to any different idea, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. You know what I mean? So
one thought here I want to particularly press on that you raised about what is the center, specifically about Medicare for all. Let's just talk about that. There are bipartisan majorities across the entire United States that favor recognizing a universal right to healthcare. And they recognize that it will drive down costs, that it will improve outcomes, that it will prevent homelessness, that it will be a no-brainer, a job stimulus creation lever. And yet, people describe the center as the corporate refusal to accept the bipartisan will of the United States. And this is an interesting thing to observe, where the center actually doesn't represent the people. It doesn't even represent the center. The center is simply Wall Street, and political reporters particularly characterize everything else as somehow extreme, even when bipartisan majorities agree. And I think it's important for us to claim this, not the center, but the polity, and to put we the people of the United States in our rightful place at the center of our policy calculus. There was a study done by some Princeton University academics. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And they demonstrated that popular support for a policy in no way correlates with the success of those policies. In other words, we're not actually a democracy at all. What they demonstrated is that what moves policy is capital. When businesses want a policy, everyone in Washington will race, they will fall over themselves to line up behind it.
You know what? Business writes the damn bill in many cases. They'll write the bill. And there's been I was watching a documentary, I forget which one it was.
House of Cards.
About a congressional candidate that put this bill up, and he forgot to take Alec off the headers.
Off the headliner, yeah.
Yeah.
That went viral some years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for
in
your
fact,
viewers who might not know, just to put this out there, ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Right. They're basically a right-wing shadow group that's pushing not just conservative, but radically conservative laws across the states, particularly through state legislatures. When Trayvon Martin was gunned down, and it was George Zimmerman, I believe, was the name of the defendant who claimed the stand your ground defense, that was a law that ALEC was pushing in state legislatures around the country. Every time you see some crazy measure, like an anti-immigration bill, for instance, it's always moving through this organization. And there are other analogous organizations like the Federalist Society that does the federal judiciary, what ALEC does to state legislatures. But you're absolutely right to notice that.
Yeah, and Alec, the funny thing about that particular story that Haas just said is when they challenged him on the House floor, the congressman who said he proposed the bill was his bill. Mm-hmm. They asked him if it came from Alec. He said, "No, it's 100% my idea." And then they put it on the what do they call that? The overhead projector, like in social studies, right?
Yes.
And they set right on the top.
Alec.
Yeah, right there. Now what you got to say? I don't know how it got there. All right, so
must have been George Soros on the left.
Yeah, but if it's Soros, then it's. I mean, we're funded by Soros. We're still waiting for our check, but we're definitely funded by George Soros.
Right.
Man, I've been waiting on that longer than that STEMI, man. I've been sitting here.
You haven't been waiting on it longer than I've been waiting on my care package from CAO. I'll tell you that.
No, you have not. That's gonna go on. That's perpetual.
You ain't